The forest was silent, save for the occasional rustle of leaves underfoot as the group of tourists ventured deeper into its heart. They were thrill-seekers, drawn by tales of the unknown, the promise of adventure in a place where the canopy was so thick daylight barely kissed the ground. But as the sun dipped below the horizon, the adventure turned into a nightmare. First, it was Emily, the photographer, who lagged behind to capture the perfect shot of the twilight filtering through the trees. She never caught up. Then, Mark, the self-proclaimed survivalist, went to scout ahead and never returned. One by one, the group dwindled, their laughter replaced by the eerie silence of the forest. The local police, when finally alerted, combed through the underbrush, their flashlights cutting through the darkness. No signs of struggle, no blood, no clues, just an unsettling absence. But as they dug into the history of this place, a chilling pattern emerged. Decades ago, another group had vanished here, and before them, another. Each time, the missing were on the brink of revealing something that seemed to vanish with them. Detective Sarah Jennings, assigned to the case, felt the weight of history pressing down as she sifted through old files and newspaper clippings. Each disappearance was linked to a thread of investigation that, when pulled, seemed to unravel into the void. What was it about this forest that swallowed secrets and people alike? Why did those who came too close to its truth disappear without a trace? As Sarah delved deeper, she uncovered whispers of a dark tradition, a cruel pact made with the forest itself. It was said that the forest demanded silence, and those who dared to speak its secrets were silenced forever. The tourists, like those before them, had unknowingly stepped into a trap laid by generations of guardians, sworn to protect the forest's secrets at any cost. Detective Sarah Jennings sat in the dim light of her office, the walls lined with maps and photographs of the missing. Her eyes, weary from hours of research, scanned an old, yellowed newspaper article. It told of a similar group of explorers, vanished in the same forest, their disappearance attributed to a wild animal attack, an explanation that felt as hollow as the silence of the woods. She leaned back, her chair creaking under the weight of her thoughts. "There's something here," she muttered to herself, tapping her pen against the article. "Something beyond the natural." Her phone buzzed, breaking her concentration. It was Officer Daniels, one of the first responders to the scene. "Detective, we've got something." Daniels's voice was urgent, his usual calm replaced by a nervous edge. "We found a diary and the belongings left behind. It's from one of the missing tourists." "Bring it in immediately," Sarah instructed, her pulse quickening. Within the hour, Daniels was at her desk, handing over a small leather-bound book. Sarah flipped through its pages, the handwriting becoming increasingly frantic. The entries detailed their journey, the excitement, but then the tone shifted. April 15th. We've heard whispers, not of wind, but of voices. They seem to come from the trees themselves. April 17th. Mark found old symbols carved into the bark. They looked ancient, like warnings. April 19th. Something's wrong. Emily didn't come back last night. We're not alone here. The last entry was dated the day before they were reported missing. April 20th. We've uncovered something that shouldn't be spoken of. If you find this, know that we tried to leave, but the forest, it won't let us go. Sarah closed the diary, her mind racing. This wasn't just about missing tourists. It was about a legacy of silence enforced by fear and perhaps something far more sinister. She stood up, her decision made. I'm going into the forest myself. There's more to this than what's been told." Daniels looked at her, concern etched on his face. "Are you sure that's wise, Detective? People have a way of disappearing in there." Sarah met his gaze, her resolve firm. "If we're to understand this, we need to confront it. I'll take precautions, but we can't let fear dictate our actions. Not anymore." As she prepared for her venture into the heart of the mystery, the forest seemed to loom larger, its secrets whispering in the shadows, waiting for someone brave or foolish enough to listen. Sarah Jennings, equipped with a backpack filled with survival gear, a GPS tracker, and a high-powered flashlight, entered the forest as dawn broke. The early morning light cast long shadows, making the forest seem even more foreboding than it had in the dark. The path was barely visible, overgrown with moss and ferns, as if nature itself was trying to reclaim what was once hers. Sarah moved with caution, her senses heightened, every snap of a twig or rustle of leaves sending a jolt through her. She remembered the diary's last entry, the fear in those words, and felt a chill that wasn't just from the morning air. As she ventured deeper, the forest seemed to change. The trees grew closer together, their branches intertwining overhead, creating a natural labyrinth. The air grew heavy, charged with an unseen tension. Sarah paused, checking her map. The symbols Mark had found were marked here, near an old, forgotten path. She found them, etched into the bark of an ancient oak. They were crude, yet precise, symbols of protection or warning, she couldn't tell. She took photos, her camera's shutter sound disturbingly loud in the silence. Her walkie-talkie crackled to life, startling her. "Detective, your signal's getting weak," Daniel's voice came through, laced with static. "Keep in touch." "I will," Sarah responded, her voice steady despite the growing unease. She continued, the path leading her to a clearing where the ground was oddly barren, as if something had been buried there long ago. In the center of the clearing, an old weathered stone stood, covered in similar symbols to those on the tree. Sarah approached, her hand reaching out to touch the cold stone. Suddenly, the forest seemed to hold its breath. Then, from the undergrowth, figures emerged, not spirits or mythical creatures, but people, dressed in clothes that seemed out of time. Their faces were hard, eyes filled with a mix of fear and determination. "Who are you?" Sarah demanded, her hand instinctively going to her sidearm. "We are the keepers," one of them, an elderly woman with a voice like the wind through leaves, answered. "This forest has secrets that must remain buried. You've come too close, just like the others." Sarah's mind raced. "You're responsible for the disappearances?" "We protect," the woman corrected. "Those who uncover too much, they must be silenced. It's a pact, a duty passed down through generations." "Why?" Sarah's voice was a mix of anger and curiosity. The woman sighed, her gaze distant. "Long ago, this land was cursed. Those who tried to exploit it, to reveal its darkness, brought upon themselves and others a fate worse than death. We keep the balance. We keep the silence." Sarah felt a surge of defiance. "And what gives you the right to decide who lives or disappears?" "It's not about rights, Detective. It's about survival. The forest demands its secrets remain hidden. If you leave now, you might still be spared." But Sarah couldn't leave, not without answers. "I'm not here to disturb your secrets. I'm here for those who vanished, for justice." The keepers exchanged looks, a silent conversation. Finally, the woman nodded. "Then come," See what we protect, but know this: once you see, you cannot unsee. They led her to a hidden cave, its entrance covered by thick vines. Inside, the walls were lined with artifacts, bones, and diaries of those who had come before. Sarah's heart sank as she recognized some items from the missing tourists. "This is where we keep the evidence of our duty," the woman explained. "Each item, each person, a reminder of what happens when the pact is broken." Sarah, now understanding the depth of the tradition, felt a mix of horror and resolve. This ends today. We can't keep sacrificing people to myths and fears. The woman looked at her, her eyes softening. "Perhaps you are right. Perhaps it's time for a new pact, one that doesn't involve loss, but understanding." Sarah left the cave, her mind racing with the implications. She knew this wasn't just about solving a case, it was about changing a legacy. As she emerged from the forest, the weight of history seemed lighter, but the path forward was clear. She would bring this story to light, not with fear, but with the hope of breaking a cycle of silence that had lasted too long. As Detective Sarah Jennings emerged from the cave, the forest seemed to watch her every move, its silence now a heavy cloak rather than a shroud of mystery. She felt the eyes of the keepers on her back, their presence a palpable force in the dim light filtering through the canopy. The weight of the artifacts, the bones, and the diaries she had seen inside the cave pressed down on her, each a testament to the cost of the forest's secrets. Sarah's steps were purposeful as she made her way back to where she had left her gear. Her mind was a whirlwind of thoughts, each more urgent than the last. The diary entries, the symbols, the pact, it all pointed to a tradition steeped in fear, a cycle of violence hidden beneath the guise of protection. Her walkie-talkie crackled again, Daniel's voice breaking through the static. "Detective, you're almost out of range. Everything okay?" "Not exactly," Sarah replied, her voice firm. "I've seen what they've been hiding. We need to talk, but not over this." "Understood. Be careful," Daniel said, his tone laced with concern. Reaching her gear, Sarah pulled out her camera, reviewing the photos she had taken of the symbols and the cave. Each image was a piece of evidence, a fragment of a larger puzzle that now seemed solvable. She packed her things, her movements quick and decisive, driven by a newfound resolve. As she started her trek back, the forest seemed less oppressive, perhaps sensing her determination. The path back was not as daunting, but every rustle, every shadow, reminded her of the stakes. She knew now that the forest was not just a place of disappearance, but a battleground where secrets fought to remain buried. Her thoughts were interrupted by a sudden sharp pain in her leg. She looked down to see a small dart protruding from her thigh. Panic surged through her, but before she could react, her vision blurred, and her limbs felt heavy. The world spun, and as she fell, the last thing she saw were figures moving towards her, their faces obscured by the forest shadows. When Sarah awoke, she was in a small, dimly lit room, the walls made of rough-hewn wood. Her head throbbed, and her limbs were bound. Across from her sat the elderly woman, her eyes now filled with a sorrowful resolve. "You should have left, Detective," the woman said, her voice weary. "Now, you've seen too much." Sarah struggled against her bindings, her voice hoarse. This isn't about seeing too much. It's about stopping this cycle of fear. Those people, they didn't deserve to disappear. The woman sighed, looking away. "We do what we must to protect the pact. The forest, it has a will of its own, and we are its stewards." Sarah's eyes narrowed, her mind racing for a way out. not just for herself, but for the truth she had uncovered. You can't keep hiding behind tradition. There are families out there, waiting for answers, for closure. The room grew colder, the silence stretching like a taut wire between them. The woman stood, her movements slow, deliberate. You think you can change centuries of tradition with your justice? This forest has seen more than you could ever understand. Suddenly, the door burst open, and Daniels, along with several officers, stormed in. The room filled with chaos as flashlights cut through the dimness, and the keepers, caught off guard, scrambled. "Detective," Daniel shouted, rushing to Sarah's side to cut her bindings. "We tracked your signal. Are you all right?" Sarah nodded, rubbing her wrists as she stood. "I'm fine, but we need to end this now. They've been hiding the truth for too long." The elderly woman watched, her expression unreadable as the keepers were detained. "You might win this battle, detective, but the forest, it will always have its secrets." Outside, the forest seemed to breathe a sigh, its branches rustling as if whispering to each other. Sarah, now free, looked back at the cave entrance, now visible in the light of the officers' torches. "We're not just here for the missing," Sarah said, her voice carrying over the murmurs of the forest. "We're here to break the cycle. The truth must come out, not just for the victims, but for everyone who's ever been silenced by fear." The officers began to secure the area, collecting evidence, while Daniel stayed close to Sarah. "What now, detective?" "Now, we bring this to light. We expose what's been hidden, and we ensure this never happens again. We'll need to talk to everyone involved, understand the full scope of this tradition." As they walked out of the forest, the weight of the legacy seemed to shift. The forest, once a place of dread, now felt like a witness to change. Sarah knew the road ahead would be fraught with resistance, but with every step she took, she felt the chains of silence loosening. The climax wasn't just about her escape or the capture of the keepers. It was about the dawn of understanding, the beginning of a new narrative where fear did not dictate the fate of those who ventured into the unknown. The forest would always hold its secrets, but now those secrets would not be guarded by violence, but by the law and the light of truth. As Detective Sarah Jennings and Officer Daniels emerged from the dense foliage, the forest seemed to exhale, releasing its grip on the secrets it had held for generations. The sun, now higher in the sky, cast beams of light through the canopy, illuminating the path they walked, as if nature itself was eager to reveal the truth. The journey back to civilization was quiet, each step echoing with the weight of the revelations they carried. Sarah's mind was a tumultuous sea of thoughts, each wave crashing with the faces of the missing, the artifacts in the cave, and the haunting words of the keepers. Once they reached the station, the atmosphere was charged with a mix of relief and urgency. Sarah immediately called for a press conference. "We need to inform the public," she told Daniels. "This isn't just about the missing tourists. It's about breaking a cycle of fear that's been perpetuated for far too long." The press conference was set to reveal the truth about the forest and its keepers, marking the beginning of a new era of transparency and justice.